If you have a lot of waste, find a way to use it. I think this is really the best way to solve our problems. If you generate waste, find a way to make it useful. If you can't, then find a way to make it so you can, or so that the waste you make is useful instead of useless. Continuing to recirculate resources and energy is the key to sustainable growth in life. So this is kind of based off of how trees function, right? And I have another talk um, that I potentially was going to do, but I might just combine it into this one where it had snowed, right? And then the snow kind of solidified into ice and it had covered the ground. And I noticed underneath all these trees around my office that I work at that there was just tons of basically bird poop all on top of this snow, and you wouldn't notice it if the snow wasn't there because it just looks like it's with the dirt, right? It just kind of blends in, so you don't notice it. But because of the white backdrop, you could realize just how much basically fertilizer is being dropped underneath these trees every year, passively by these birds passing through, right? These trees just naturally are getting resources dropped in for them to utilize by these birds, and it's the waste of the birds, but this is the nutrients for the trees, right? And the trees will drop their leaves, and all the energy that went into their leaves, right? It drops down to the floor, or to the ground, and then those leaves eventually decompose, and that becomes nutrients again for the trees. And so there's not a lot of waste in the growth of the tree. It takes in the resources from around it and then returns the resources as much as possible back to where it is, and then resources are passively distributed back to it just by the value that it provides, by providing, a place for these birds to rest. It is supplied with nutrients by making use of the bird's waste, right? And so I think the way to create a functional and sustainable system is to make it so that every part of the process produces waste that can then be used for another process. If you're generating a lot of waste, then find a way not to get rid of it, but to utilize it. And if there's no way to utilize that waste, if there's nothing that can be done with it, then figure out what you can do so that you're not generating useless waste, right? And one example of this I feel is plastics. And so we had this by producing oil, you get this plastic byproduct, and then so they found a way to use the plastic byproduct, right? But then after that is used, then we have these plastics that are then seemingly useless and just end up in landfills afterwards, right? And it's not necessarily that plastic is useless, it's just that it's not really worth it for most people to go through the process of making it useful, right? And so we either need to develop a method for making it useful, right? For making plastic a beneficial resource, or we need to stop generating all this useless plastic, right? Because if only certain plastics are recyclable, we should only be making recyclable plastics. And if plastic just eventually has an end of life use, right? Eventually it just runs out of being recyclable and it's no longer feasible, then that waste product we should find a solution for. At the end of its life, okay, this is no longer viable to recycle. Okay, well then what do we do with it then? There should be nothing that's getting deposited in a landfill and forgotten about. At the end of the day, I don't think that anything should end up in the landfill. That's how you know that you're doing things properly. If all waste is reused, right? Because if you think about how much energy and resources is ending up in a landfill every day, it's actually insane. Think about all the energy that is being wasted, all the resources that are wasted in landfills. And we keep saying, oh, there's such a lack of resources. It's because we're so wasteful with them. nothing should be waste. There should be nothing that's really waste. But it's just easier to throw everything out and have it just disappear, because out of sight, out of mind. But that will come back to bite us, right? And it already is, in, if you really think about it. And it's just because we're not being smart with our resources. It's because we've had so much supply, we didn't care about managing it properly. But that's starting to not really be the case anymore. And so we have to be a lot more economical and efficient with these processes. We need to think about, okay, well, I'm going to make this, and it's going to generate this, and I'm going to use that to make this, and then this can then be used in this process over here, right? There should always be a waste stream or something like that. There should always be somewhere that everything is going to and coming from, right? If it's coming from here, everything before that, has everything has a destination at the end of the day. Nothing goes to landfills. That's just how it should be, right? But it's not necessarily profitable to do that. But my opinion is that what's the point of profits if the world is on fire? And, what good is money when there's nothing left to buy? And, what are you going to do when it's too late for things to be done? Because if you keep waiting until it's a problem, you waited too long, right? It's already a problem, but if you keep waiting and keep saying, nah, it'll be okay, then it'll be too late to make a difference. You're not going to have enough time. Procrastination is, useful up to a point. And then after that point, you put yourself in a position where you can't fulfill the goal, right? If you have an essay that's due in an hour and you haven't even started yet, you're screwed, right? You're not writing that unless you just use AI to write your whole thing for you, which is now an option, right? But that's a whole nother thing in itself, right? Pushing things off, puts yourself on the pedal, makes you have to think a little bit more, makes you a little more focused, more driven towards your goal, right? And it's not necessarily the best way of doing things, but it has uses. But after a certain point, it's no longer useful, it's detrimental. And that's just important to consider, I guess. It's not too late to take action. Realistically, it's never too late to take action. It's just going to get progressively harder to take action the longer you wait. And at some point, it's not that we can't do it, it's just that most won't. And it won't be pretty. And I prefer to avoid that. I think everyone would prefer to avoid that. But we have to actually take action in order for that to be the case. So, peace out.